Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Friday everybody. I hope you've had a productive week. It's good to almost be at the end of it. I wish you all a restful weekend ahead. We start today's episode once again with tensions across the Taiwan Strait. We've had heavy coverage on this space this week, but since the inauguration of President Lai on Monday, we've seen escalations in both rhetoric and actions from Beijing. China's military started its second day of war games around Taiwan today, with drills to test their ability to, quote, seize power, end quote, in the words of state media. Today we will discuss the fallout and implications of these military drills, which kicked off early yesterday morning local time. This map shows the large-scale exercises conducted by the PLA in 2022 after the Pelosi visit in grey, and then the current drills are in red. There are two notable escalations. One, the current drills are closer to Taiwan in some locations, and two, these new exercises are involving the Chinese Coast Guard, and its operations are inside the restricted waters of Wuqiu and Dongyin Islands off the mainland coast. Unlike in the larger exercises China conducted in the last 2 years, this week's might feature training to seize one of those islands. Quote, "Those are non-war coercive maneuvers. If they entered our 12 nautical mile zone, the sovereign waters, that would trigger a strong response also from the US. But what they are doing now is trying to undermine our jurisdiction in a way that doesn't allow us to do much." End quote. His colleague added some more context. Quote, "The drills this week are more comprehensive than before. By including the outlying islands as well, Beijing is demonstrating its ability to control the seas. The political signals there are greater than the military ones. We can almost certainly expect that there will be more drills to come, and what's concerning about that is that the more China launches these exercises, the more they are normalizing such actions." End quote. In an interview with state-run CCTV, military expert Zhang Chi gave a blunt explanation of what Beijing is preparing for. Quote, "This exercise introduced a new mode. Taiwan is an isolated island, suspended in the sea with weak self-sufficiency. Taiwan's economy is export-oriented, and most of its energy consumption relies on imports. Once besieged and blockaded, it can easily lead to economic collapse, turning it into a dead island. This exercise is focused on practicing a new mode of blockading Taiwan." End quote. Thursday evening, the PRC Foreign Ministry spokesperson reiterated that the drills are, quote, "completely legitimate and necessary and fully in line with international law and practice," end quote, adding, quote, "Anyone seeking Taiwan independence will find themselves crushed by the historic trend of China's complete reunification." And, quote, "We urge the US side to stop emboldening and supporting the Taiwan independence forces and stop interfering in China's internal affairs. Any act that endangers China's national sovereignty and territorial integrity will be resolutely and forcefully counterattacked by China." End quote. Washington, however, does not appear to be too fazed by the threats. The same day we learned that the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the US House of Representatives will lead a delegation to visit Taiwan at the end of May to congratulate Taiwan's new leader on his inauguration. The situation across the Taiwan Strait is becoming incredibly dangerous. Speaking at the Nikkei Forum in Tokyo today, Friday, Singapore Deputy Prime Minister Gan Kim-yong warned that Taiwan has become, quote, "one of the most dangerous flashpoints in the world," end quote, explaining, quote, "The US-China relationship is the most consequential in the world, but is unfortunately marked by deep suspicion and distrust. When each side views the other as an adversary, the risk of accidents and miscalculations increases. Taiwan is one of the most sensitive issues in the US-China relationship. Any clash in the Taiwan Strait will have dire consequences, not just for the parties involved, but the entire world as well," end quote. Next up, it's been a big week in EU-China developments. Tomorrow we will take a deep dive into these. For today, though, we will note a development in Beijing's relations with a very small European state. The Vatican. This week, it looks like the Vatican is pushing for the opening of a permanent office in Beijing in exchange for compromises. Relations between the Vatican and Communist China have historically been fraught, but Pope Francis has made it a priority to normalize them. Beijing has been following a policy of sinification of religion, trying to root out foreign influences and enforce obedience to the party. The Vatican hosted the head of China's bishops' conference for an unprecedented high-level commemoration of a landmark 1924 meeting in Shanghai that affirmed the need for foreign missionaries in China to give way to local church leaders. The presence of Shanghai Bishop Joseph Shenbin alongside the Vatican Secretary of State at the Pontifical Urbaniana University marked the first time in memory that a mainland bishop has been allowed by Beijing to participate in a public Vatican event as the keynote speaker. US-based The Associated Press writes that it was also significant given the controversy over Shen's 2023 appointment. Pope Francis in July was forced to recognize China's unilateral appointment of Shen as Bishop of Shanghai. The appointment seemingly violated the Holy See's 2018 accord with Beijing over bishop appointments. It seems that the Vatican would like to establish a permanent office in China in what would be a major upgrade of diplomatic relations with Beijing. The Cardinal Secretary of State expressed on Tuesday, quote, "We have been hoping for a long time to be able to have a stable presence in China," end quote. There are an estimated 10 to 12 million Catholics in China. Next up, we turn to US-China competition in technology and artificial intelligence. But just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode, it's a huge help if you can hit the like button. Subscribing is also a big help. Sharing these episodes is a big help. It's the only way in which the channel can grow, and Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description below for anyone who wants to help keep the channel financially sustainable. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, and finally for today, Chinese financial media outlet Caixin has published an interesting long piece on the gains Huawei is seeing in sales of its AI chips because of the throttled AI chips Nvidia is allowed to sell into the PRC are so basic. It's also likely that Chinese companies, especially state-owned enterprises, are being told to buy Huawei chips. The argument made by the outlet is that Huawei may end up being one of the big winners from the US export controls. The piece says that the lower-end artificial intelligence chips that Nvidia is exporting to China in order to skirt US export controls, quote, are so underwhelming that local technology firms are turning to Huawei, end quote. It comes as the Chinese national champion begins to benefit from, quote, desperation among domestic tech firms to source the AI chips they need to train large language models for chat GPT-like tools, end quote. Insiders tell the outlet that the switch to Huawei chips is fraught, however, due to the onerous task of migrating from Nvidia's well-regarded AI ecosystem to another. In some tests, a single Huawei Ascend 910B chip has outperformed a single Nvidia H20 chip, several industry experts told Caixin. But the H20 chip has an advantage because of Nvidia's NVLink interconnect technology, which allows several chips to be grouped together as one, thus enhancing their combined computing power, especially when a single chip cannot perform required tasks. The Ascend 910B is an upgraded version of the Ascend 910, which was launched in August 2019 and made with 7nm technology. Huawei is expected to launch the more powerful Ascend 910C chip in the second half of the year, which will feature more powerful interconnect capabilities. Meanwhile, UK-based Financial Times reports today that China is urging the country's top car makers to source up to a quarter of their chips locally by 2025. Quote, as the world's biggest automotive market looks to build a semiconductor supply chain amid escalating tensions with the US, end quote. More than 30 million cars are sold in China each year, about a third of global sales, but local automotive chip supplies are only about 10%. Quote, by protecting chip making, Beijing is seeking to alter global comparative advantage in the sector in its favor. There's nothing wrong with this, as long as the effective subsidies to the chip sector aren't paid for by suppressing domestic demand, i.e. Chinese households. China should indeed implement trade and industrial policies designed to give it comparative advantage in strategically important sectors, and foreign governments cannot complain as long as this doesn't result in even larger trade surpluses. But of course, this works both ways. No one can legitimately complain if the US, the EU, Japan or others also decide that these sectors are strategically important and so aggressively implement trade and industrial policies designed to protect or regain comparative advantage. End quote. We will be discussing some of these themes in depth in tomorrow's episode as we examine China trying to prevent the EU and the United States allying in their trade policy against China, a development which could be catastrophic for the Chinese economy. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a great Friday, have a restful and wonderful weekend, and I will see you all tomorrow.